We are going to talk in the next few minutes about the important topic of supporting the development of students' critical thinking. As Joe mentioned already, with us today is a colleague of mine, Dr. Zara Digan from the Australian Catholic University. We thought this is a great opportunity because we're talking about the Australian-Israeli collaboration. It's a great chance to have her part of this talk, so she will also be part of the presentation in the next few minutes. And as I said, I look forward to having a discussion about the things that that I'm going to present you with. I'm talking to you from Tel Aviv, from Israel at the moment. I'm a senior lecturer at the Bet Berl Academic College. It's one of the main and leading teacher training colleges in Israel. We have about 3,000 students there every year. And one of the main areas that we promote as part of our college is the collaboration between people from different groups. So it could be Jewish and Arab students, it could be religious, non-religious. So we're doing a lot to promote collaboration, thinking together, working together. And this is especially relevant in the times we have today. So this is just as a small background to our college and to what we're doing there. So let's get into our topic, and I will start with a quick riddle for you all to wake you up if you're in Israel, or to make sure you're waking up after lunch in Australia. So the question goes like this, and I will give you a few seconds to think about the answer, so you don't need to rush up for that. So the question is like this. Anna is only looking at Betty, Betty is only looking at Cindy, and Cindy is not looking at anyone. Anna is wearing a hat, Cindy is not wearing a hat. And the question is, in this scenario, is there someone with a hat looking at someone without a hat? Okay, that's the question, and I'll give you three options. 1, yes, 2, no, and 3, can't be determined. And what I will ask you now is, if you can please write in the chat, what do you think is the correct answer? 1, 2, or 3? Joe, with the group there, maybe you can ask them all to decide on an answer, but make sure we don't hear it. I don't want it to be this influencing the others here. So please, in the chat, if you think you know the answer, please write the number that you choose. Okay, I'm not seeing any numbers yet. I'll give you a few more seconds. Okay, now I see answers. So I see 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. Okay. Does anyone that wrote the answer wants to say a few words why you think this is the correct answer?
Well, the only person wearing a hat is Anna, right? And in this scenario, is there someone with a hat looking at someone without a hat? So Anna might be looking at somebody, but we don't know if that somebody has a hat or not. Unless yeah, I think that's my rationale.
Okay, thank you. So I will, since all the answers here are 3, I will, and since we also have a short time, I will tell you this. It's a good reasoning, but in this case, it's the wrong one. I think maybe the issue that what you said is that we're not sure that we know that Anna has a hat. We're not sure about what's happening with Betty, right? Because I didn't give you any information if she has a hat or not. But if you think about it closely, there's actually only two options in this scenario. It could be that Betty has a hat or that Betty doesn't have a hat. If she has a hat, then she is looking at Cindy, and Cindy is not wearing a hat. So there is someone with a hat looking at someone without a hat. If Betty doesn't have a hat, Anna is looking at her, and Anna has a hat. So actually the correct answer in this riddle is yes, number one, option one. And this is interesting because, first of all, it's okay that you got it wrong. It's not a mistake. I would ask you, is this convincing for you? Do you now agree with me that the correct answer in this case is one and not three? Or does anyone still think that this is wrong? Okay. I will, because of our time limit, I will move forward, but I think what I wanted to show you here is, first of all, you're all okay. Usually all the answers I get for this question is the answers are three. Oh, yeah, thank you. Someone wrote that, got it. So the point is not to show that you're thinking in a wrong way. The point here is what I want to show you about critical thinking, that critical thinking is something that doesn't really come easy for us. And from this riddle, I can explain it in two ways, and I want to show you both of these things. First of all, I would say a quick introduction to the topic of systems 1 and 2. This is something coming from Daniel Kahneman, the Israeli-American psychologist. He won the Nobel Prize in economics in 2002, I think it was. And he wrote about it. He passed away about a month ago. I'm really recommending reading his stuff, like the book Thinking Fast and Slow. And he talked about the fact that we have two systems in our mind. And this is a metaphorical system. It's not a physical system in the brain. But we have system one, which is the intuitive system. It's a fast thinking system. It's something that's done unconsciously. It's automatic. We use it for simple everyday decision, but the problem is that this is that it's very error prone. There could be many mistakes with this type of thinking, but we need this thinking. We need this for quick decisions that we make. For example, if we're driving and there is an animal jumping on the road, we need system one to take control, and we need to quickly do something to avoid a collision with the animal. So this is something that we need, and it's important for us. On the other side, we have system two, which is the exact opposite of it. System two is slow. It requires a lot of effort. It requires conscious thinking. We use it for complex decision, and it's much more reliable than system one. When do we use system two? For example, when we return from IKEA with all the furniture and we have the long textbook with the explanations of how to build it, we all know these feelings. We need to really concentrate on what we're doing. So both of these systems are very important for our decision making. The problem is, and this is what Kahneman and others are saying, is that sometimes we mix between them. Sometimes we use system one when we're supposed to use system two, and the other way around. We use system two when we're supposed to use system one. And a lot of the problems we have with critical thinking is that we are doing this mixture. For example, when I gave you this riddle, it was under time pressure. We are now in an online talk. We're not really giving you time to think and to really go deep into this question. So most people will give answer that we can determine. Also, when I first saw this riddle, this is the answer I gave. So you're in good company. However, the second point that I want to make about this riddle, and this comes to another great book by Sperber and Mercer called The Enigma of Reason, is that we are not always good at thinking alone. And when I gave you the riddle now, I gave you a little bit of time to think by yourself, except for maybe the group there in Australia. But we are very good, and we are even amazing at thinking together. And you can see even in this example that although most of you gave the answer of 3, which is the wrong answer, as soon as I gave you the correct explanation, which is something pretty simple and basic, I think most of you got persuaded that this is the correct answer. So this is the point I want to make. First of all, we're sometimes not using the correct way of thinking. And second point is that we're very good at thinking together. So this will be the foundation for the next few minutes where I talk about critical thinking. I will move forward so we don't run out of time. So a few words about what is critical thinking, and it's a very complicated discussion. I'm not going to go into the entire definitions that we have, but the most common and typical definition is by Robert Ennis, and he says critical thinking is reasonable, reflective thinking focused on deciding what to believe or what to do. So it's something that is reflective, something we use for making decision. But this is a very general and broad definition that doesn't really go into the small details of it. Another definition coming from McPeak is critical thinking is reflective skepticism used for problem solving in a specific discipline. And this is already pushing us into the right direction, that critical thinking, although it's a general skill or practice, it is something that we have to implement in a specific discipline, whether it's biology, physics, history, whatever, and it is something we use for problem solving. So it's something we use for a specific problem. Also, it brings in the point of skepticism, which is very critical. Having doubt and being skeptical, very important for critical thinking. It's also in many times put in parallel with scientific thinking. So this is what makes it relevant for our work in the university, in our higher education. We want to teach students to ask questions, to draw conclusions, to analyze data, to be reflective of the process. So it's very much correlates with this kind of thinking and this kind of skills. And perhaps the definition that I like the most is the definition that goes all the way back to ancient Greek philosophy, coming from Pyrrho of Elis, who was the first skeptic philosopher. And also it runs all the way to modern times with Dewey, with Edmund Husserl, all these philosophers and researchers. And they talked about critical thinking as being something that we do while we're suspending our judgment, that we are not going to make a decision and be fixed on one specific decision or belief while we are doing the learning process or the investigation process. And this is something that's very, very difficult for us to do, especially in today's modern environment where everything is fast and quick. Things are happening so quickly all the time in the news, in social media. We're bombarded with information. We're pushed to make very quick judgment and very quick decision, who is right, who is wrong. And this is something that goes against good critical thinking. Good critical thinking requires us to use this suspension of judgment, to take our time, to think slowly, to use our system to all of these things. And this is something that's not coming easy for us. So I think this is a good definition. The last point I want to make about this is that in the last few years, we're talking about a shift from critical thinking as dispositions and skills to critical thinking as practices, something that we practice, both dialogic and epistemic practices, meaning that it's something that we do in dialogue with other people. It's a social practice and something related to our knowledge, our shared knowledge building that we do in society. And I think this is a very important point, relates to what I mentioned before, that we're very good at thinking together. So it should be a social epistemic practice, and this is an important point to make about critical thinking. I'm running to the next part, although I'll be interested later to hear your points about this. Another thing I want to talk about is how is science done? And usually when we ask students or when we are discussing it ourselves, we get the picture of what we call death scientific method. This method that starts with encountering a phenomena and then doing some experiments, observation, collecting data, collecting evidence, interpreting the evidence, doing some logical reasoning, publishing it in some scientific paper or some other mean, and we have some system of balances and checks, critical peer review, all of that, and then we reach some scientific consensus about the matter. And this is how it's done in the scientific community. However, there is another part of this and this process is usually presented as a very a good, effective, meaningful, successful process. But on the other hand, we can ask, how is science communicated? And there the picture gets complicated. And there we see epistemic dependence, we see imitators of science, bogus scientific claims, deceptive tactics, media gatekeeper, cognitive filters, social media, all these things that are making this bad image of science and what science is. And this image is from a paper by Elchin, so it's not something that I made up. But my point that I want to stress here is that in my view, this is a bad way to present science. This image for me is very, very wrong. Why? Not because there are not all these deceptive and bad science that we see in the bottom part of the figure, but because we have a problem when we, as scientists, as researchers, are presenting the scientific process as this pure, perfect, flawless process, very simple way. We just do our experiments, we find the data, we reach a consensus, and everything is fine. And I have a problem with this because I think we all know, and we can discuss it later if you agree with me or not, the scientific process is not like this. The scientific process is messy. We are influenced by a lot of biases. We have a lot of things that are affecting our decision. We have our frameworks that we're using that are sometimes the wrong frameworks. We're making a lot of mistakes in science. There is a great talk that I put the link here of a talk by a neurobiologist, Stuart Firestein, a TED talk called The Pursuit of Ignorance, I'm sorry. And this is a great talk that he talks about this thing. So in a way, what bothers me is that we're presenting science as this pure process, and we're not giving enough emphasis to the problems and difficulties and biases we have in our own scientific process. And this is something that is a challenge for us, because obviously we don't want to talk about ourselves and say we're doing mistakes, we're doing things wrong. But I think this is a problem because we are kind of influencing or manipulating the public, the students, the general people that are listening to the science. And we are creating this authoritative bias where we expect people to believe us, whatever science says is the absolute truth, without showing also that science can change, science can reach new conclusions. We keep changing what we believe is the consensus at the moment. And this is something that for me is a problem, is a challenge for us as scientists, as science communicators, as educators, of showing the problems that we have with our science that we do. Not saying it as undermining the authority and the expertise that we have. Science is the best method we have to reach conclusion and find the right answers, but we have to also be aware of the problems we have. Same like when we're talking about democracy and why democracy is so important, but democracy has problems, and none of the democracies we have in the world is a perfect regime, but we have to be aware of it, and we can say it while still saying that science or democracy or whatever we believe is the best way of and the best thing that we want. So I hope I opened a few thinking points here, because this is what moves me to the thing I want to show you and the study that I want to present, to share with you. I know our time is very limited, so I will finish very soon. All of these issues that I just discussed led me to develop a course for graduate students, mostly master students in biology. This was a course I developed during my postdoc in Berlin, in Freie University, that I spent a few years there, and I had a chance to really develop this course. And my goal was to give these graduate students a chance to really deeply reflect on all the critical thinking topics, what could be influencing them, both as future or present scientists, biologists, and in their daily decision-making. So this was the course that I developed. I will show you very quickly a few results that I have from a publication that came out of this course. This is the paper that I published together with Professor Dick Kruger at Freie University. So you're welcome to download this paper and read more. And I will give a quick description of what we did and found in this study. So in the course itself, we covered many topics related to scientific thinking and critical thinking. We talked about knowledge and thinking in general, all kind of effects that are affecting our thinking. For example, the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is very interesting. We talked a lot about reasoning and argumentation, logical fallacies, arguments, how are arguments structured, what are the styles of reasoning we are using in science, all of these issues. We talked about decision-making, coming a lot from behavioral psychology, all kind of effects such as loss aversion, framing, all kind of things like that. We talked about biases, cognitive biases such as confirmation bias, system 1 and 2 that we talked about before, a lot of other things. We talked about statistical and methodological issues, what is affecting us when we're planning our studies, collecting our data, collecting our samples, and all of that. We talked about socio-cultural influences, social effects that are affecting our decision-making, and also other topics related to memory, attention, perception, sensory effects, things like that. So these were the topics we covered in this course. And the highlight of the course was seminar presentations, where the students at the end of the course individually were presenting one of their projects, one of their research projects that they were doing, and they were showing it in a reflective way, discussing what kind of biases, effects, problems, based on the things that we learned in the course, what they encountered during this project that they did. So this was something that we did, and they presented, they reflected on it, and then we had a discussion where they got some feedback from the other students. So this was a very interesting process to do. What did we find? And by the way, I taught this course 4 times. So we had data from 4 groups of students. So we have quite a big data sample. And I will show you a small part of the data because we don't have too much time to go over everything, but just to give you a taste of it, and you can read more about it in the paper. So first of all, we looked at which aspects of critical thinking that were taught in the course were most relevant for the students. We determine it by looking at what topics they discussed in their final presentation, in their seminar presentation. And we saw that the most common aspect that came up was confirmation bias. Many of them talked about it, how they encountered confirmation bias in their own work. And so this was the most common typical aspect. We also saw students talk about statistical and methodological issues. A lot of them were talking about social and cultural influences. And as you can see, other biases also came up, but confirmation bias was the most common one. We also had some interviews and questions that we asked them about why was the seminar and the course relevant for them. And most of them were discussing or mentioning that this was critical for them for doing better science and for being better scientists. So this was a very good results that showed why this is important to have with students. Also, some of them discussed improving presentation skills, hearing new ideas and perspectives, being aware of their own biases and mistakes. So this was something that we saw that was really positive within the interviews. Some of them also said that it was not relevant, which is perfectly fine in a group like this. So this is a small taste of the results that we had from this course and from this seminar, and I will be happy to discuss more of it later. For the next couple of minutes, I would like to give the stage to my colleague, to Zara, and she will be presenting another aspect or perspective on critical thinking related to a project that she's doing, and we will mention a little bit of our collaboration, and then we will summarize this short talk. So Zara, I'm giving you.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you for inviting me onto this talk. So my name is Zara Digan, I'm at ICU, and I'm an early career researcher in my 3rd year. And one of the projects that I'm doing is on developing evidentiary practices in scientific reasoning in initial teacher education students. And We have surveyed ITE students over the last 3 semesters and on how they are evaluating scientific claims, and particularly in the media. And I'm just going to focus on one aspect of this survey and our study, because how Tom and I connected was through computational modeling and my interest in it and his research in it. I'm going to just briefly speak about what this study was about. So one of why is it significant? First of all, we want to develop those evidentiary practices, which means working with evidence critically in initial teacher education students, because we believe that those skills should be developed in primary school students at an early age, but the instructional the instructional difficulties that the ITE students expressed in the surveys were quite significant. So we are exposed to models and model data through media and politics, and increasingly, and I should also add, increasingly large amount of data. And because in science we're using models and modeling all the time, science education plays a really significant role in developing these skills. And particularly also teaching young learners about and letting them explore the affordances and limitations of models. So we used the Grasp of Evidence framework by Digan et al. In 2018, which has the aim to lift students' engagement with evidence to a more complex level. And we designed several intervention tasks, which you can see here in that area there. And I'm going to emphasize on the next slide on what we've done around modeling and how we try to develop students' critical thinking skills around modeling. So Tom, if you could go one further. So this is one example of what we did. So we wanted to provide students with the opportunity to use a laboratory experiment. And you can see here around melting of ice, so fairly simple experiment, but we have 2. And we asked them to use Sage Modeler, which is a systems dynamic modeling tool, educational modeling tool, to create a model that would fit the laboratory experiment. And you can see there in the table that we aligned the task with the Grasp of Evidence dimensions. And you can see here evidence interpretation, evidence integration, and also task criteria such as scientific knowledge, science inquiry, and problem-based learning. And the first experiment was fairly simple. We had a large ice cube and a small ice cube and asked which one is going to melt faster than the other, and asked them to create a model that corresponded to that. And in the second one, in the second experiment, we had a rectangle versus round or spheric ice and frozen ice, and ask again which one would melt the fastest. And we didn't give them the extra information of changing surface area and how that would affect the melting of rate. So it's interesting, Tom, that you spoke before about how this is not actually, like the scientific thinking process is not a linear, and not as without, errors, etc. Because we actually intentionally built in this model the flaw that they had to figure out how, why would one or the other melt faster without being given the special info or that specific information about the surface area and how that changes the rate of melting over time. So yeah, we have collected the survey data. We're looking forward to interpreting and analyzing the interviews and the work samples from these students. Generally speaking, I think critical thinking in instructional capabilities really need to be fostered. And it was a challenge for students to engage in critical thinking and even coming up with their own task, which was part of this research study as well, to give them some agency efficiency. But I hand back to Tom.
Yeah, thank you very much, Zara. This is a great connection to the topic of critical thinking, and also as a connection to our collaboration, since, as you said, this modeling task and modeling tool is part of also my research that I did not discuss in this meeting, but we can also discuss this later. So I want to wrap up this short talk that we gave and open up for discussion, because I'm very interested. We are very interested in listening to what you have to say about this. So what we can do, I will summarize with some points to think about and reflect about. So in general, the most important thing in my view is to engage students in critical thinking, in a dialogic and epistemic practices. And we can do it in many different ways, such as the example that I gave from my course, the example that Zara mentioned here with modeling tasks where we implement some mistakes and flaws in the process. And this is something that we actively have to try and do. On a more specific level, there are several specific practices that we can emphasize and make sure that both us and our students are implementing. So we want to emphasize taking your time when making decision and investigating. I mentioned the suspension of judgment before, so this is something that we need to really try to emphasize and try to implement it. We want to be suspicious and skeptic of intuition, both our own intuition and others' intuition. We want to be suspicious towards certainty, towards overconfidence. We know that in science, rarely there is something that is 100% certain. And any scientist that talks in a way of this is absolute known and 100% sure, we must be a little bit skeptic about it, because we know science is changing all the time. We learn new things. We can talk about the consensus, but we have to be very suspicious of something that sounds very certain and overconfident. We want to think in dimensions and scales, not in black and white, not in this dichotomy of right and wrong, black and white, good and bad. We want to think in a more complex way, in a way of a spectrum, thinking from somewhere in the middle, somewhere there's a gray area. So we want to avoid these extremes. And I think this is also relevant for our daily life. We want to search for alternative opinions and ideas. We want to have an open conversation, open discussions, the marketplace of ideas. We want to make sure that we have as many people that we interact with, many opinions, many ideas. That's how we come to better solutions and better thinking. And related to that, we also want to be open to changing our mind and not thinking that we already know the answer, not being certain and absolute about it, being able to say, I thought this way, now I'm thinking differently. Sometimes we take it as a sign of a lack of confidence or a sign of weakness, but we have to look at changing our mind as a sign of thinking and growing and developing. And we know that this is how the science, a good science works this way. In good science, we are always open to learning new things. And if you ask any Nobel Prize laureate, they will say that at the beginning, everyone thought that they were crazy, ridiculous with their ideas, with their discovery. But as time passed, they were able to convince all the others. And that's why at the end, they get the Nobel Prize. So it's something that we have to keep in mind. And the last point is the social side of it. We want to, as much as we can, to collaborate and think with others. This is how we reach the good decisions, the good problem solving, reminding you the riddle that we started with. And in general, as an overall idea that I'm trying to promote is the idea of complexity thinking. And I think this entails both the complexity of ideas, and we know that whenever we investigate a phenomenon, we know it's very complex. There are very few phenomena that are simple and straightforward. And this is the beauty and the spark of science, in my view, that we always can look at the complexity of things. We can think of other reasons, other factors, other things that are happening in reality. So it's both the content of the science that is complex, but also in our thinking. And complexity holds within it the critical thinking, the creativity, all the things that we do as part of the scientific endeavor, looking at all the things that we do. For me, it's all under the same umbrella of complexity. So I will stop at this point. I will say thank you everyone for your attention, and this is my email in case somebody wants to contact me, or Zara, I'm sure will also be happy to contact and talk with others, and I will want to use the rest of our time to talk a little bit and get your input and thoughts about what we've discussed. So I will stop the share.
Thank you so much, Tom and Zara, for your presentation. That was really amazing. If you would like to ask your question in person, please raise your hand. I think we have a first question from Efrat. So I'll let you ask your question, Efrat, and please, everyone else, just raise your hand so we know who's next. Thanks.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Zara, for a very, very interesting talk. I have one thing to say and one thing to ask. So, Tom, in relation to the first part of your talk about the messiness of science and the human bias, it is interesting that I think the Australian curriculum picked on it quite early. It is the only curriculum, to my knowledge, that has beyond the 3 strands of the National Research Council, which is the blueprint for curricula across the world, which have 3 strands: science skills, cross-cutting concepts, and science disciplines. The Australian curriculum added a 4th strand, which is science as a human endeavor, which aims to capture exactly that aspect of the science that is often missing in curricula. While I found from my experience that teachers struggle to give meaning to that strand, it is still there and gives the opportunity to deal with that for those teachers who can. My question now. In such a scientific issue as SSI, the issue of argumenting from evidence, argumentation, is this thing that has been at the forefront for many years, and the evidence is very weak. We almost find 50% success, 50% failure, regardless of a specific instruction how to argue with evidence. How do you see that relating to the theories that underlie critical thinking?
I guess I can go first at the answer. First of all, thank you, and I appreciate what you said about the Australian curriculum. It's very interesting to see that. I'm not that familiar with that, and I will be interested in learning more. Regarding what you said with evidence, for me, this is all part of the same picture. It's something that we know it's not easy, and we know that most of our argumentation and evidence-based reasoning is very much influenced by many factors, such as our prior position, our prior knowledge, our social background, our tribal affiliations, many things that are connected to it. And in my view, and again, it's something we can discuss whether it's correct or not in your opinion, I think that we are, in science education, we're doing a very good job in teaching students about evidence, using evidence, reasoning, argumentation, what is the structure of a good argument, to have the data, the claim, the warrant, all of these things, the counterposition. What we're not doing so well is helping students realize that in their own argumentation, even if they know very well how to argue and how to present their evidence and how to persuade, they are still very much influenced by their own biases and their own perceptions. And also us as scientists, as adults, we're also influenced by the way that we think. And this is something that I think we're not giving enough space in our teaching. And by saying this, I'm not saying that it means it will solve the problem that you mentioned, that 50% or as many students are not able to use good evidence and reasoning. But I think this will give a more complex picture for the students, that they learn and to understand their own flaws and their own biases, and For me, it's less critical if they're able to use the correct evidence or not. It's important, of course, for science and for the evidence that we have. But for me, there is much more place to emphasize the biases that we have. And just as a note on this, confirmation bias, which is for me one of the most fascinating biases, it's working the same way on the most intelligent people, the best scientists, the best professors, and the people that are less intelligent and with less epistemic abilities, cognitive abilities. The only difference is that the highly intelligent people know how to use argumentation and reasoning better than people that are less capable and with less intelligent or with less capabilities, whatever, but they are still under the same influence on confirmation bias. So being aware of this and being reflective of this for me is even more important than helping students have better arguments and evidence, although they are both important as well. That's my sense on this.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, and I wanted to add something here is I think also what I have come to see at least is that there is a lack of instructional capabilities on how to teach to deal with evidence critically. So to actually allow for, I mean, you know, what you said before, Tom, this, we're good at teaching, you know, the hypothesis, the aim, et cetera, of a scientific investigation, but, you know, sometimes even almost chronologically, which is not how real science occurs, but also to really build in mistakes or to deal with mistakes, to deal with failure. And that also has to do again with time and how much time do we allow in the classroom for this to happen in a really crowded curriculum. So I think, but from what I can see and what we have been researching from this project alone is that there's really a lack of knowledge on how to really critically, like how to teach those critical thinking skills related to the evidence. So, yeah. I'm not sure if that explains the 50% that you were talking about.
When I meant 50% is not 50% of the student, but 50% of the interventions. So regardless of so many interventions specifically directed to enhance argumentations from argumentation skills among students, the results show mixed results. So even when we specifically in the instruction try to develop these skills, the evidence is not good, and that's a.
And I'm thinking also about, you know, what I said in the beginning of my 2 slides, how important it is to actually start really early and not just later in life, and how we can bring this into the very early years of learners to start engaging them with evidence and not just saying this is the right approach, but here's one approach and this is another, and which one are you taking and how are you, evaluating which one is the better. So I think to start early and having that as a long-term strategy is really important.
Thank you so much. We have a question in our room, then I'll go to Brian, and we've also had a question come in on the chat from Hannah. So first, just to colleague here.
So just relating to the 2 systems of thinking, what are other more active approaches to switching between them when we're looking at a problem? So I know that there is the debating with colleagues, but is there any other active approaches?
Well, I would say that in the research literature, and this is coming more from psychology, so I'm not the best expert on this. I will say it with limitations. They talk less about what pedagogies or procedures or tactics we can do to push people to think in the right way. Mostly what is discussed is this issue of emphasizing that people need to be aware of when they're using which system, having them more aware of it, and promoting the issue of taking your time and thinking more seriously about big problems and not jumping into conclusion too quickly. I think what we are doing in science education, which is, again, it's not directly coming out of the System 1, System 2 literature, so I'm doing a bit of a jumping over a bridge here, but I think that what we are trying to do a lot in science education is to give students evidence from different perspectives, from different sources, giving activities where students are maybe exposing students' initial thoughts, which are usually based on System 1, which is quick and intuitive, and then giving them opportunities to dive deeper into evidence and activities that push them to think more on System 2. So I would say this is one way that we can do it. Debates is also a good way. I mean, we can talk about debates later. I have my own opinions about this. That kind of, I think also the other question from the audience went on that. So we can elaborate on that more, but this would be my quick answer for your good question.
Thank you, Tom. Brian, can I switch to you, please?
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation through EFRAT. I'm one of the colleagues that EFRAT has at Victoria University. So I have taught science, but I'm primarily teaching pedagogy in general. So to initial teacher education students. So I run a 2-hour session basically on metacognition, and that involves some discussion of critical thinking and creative thinking, because I try and get students to start to look at the national curriculum, which is a general capability in those areas in Australia, and also the Victorian curriculum. And the students are essentially unaware that they exist. So it's really interesting to introduce them to it. I really enjoyed listening to what you have to say, Sarah and Tom. There's a lot of things resonated for me. I find it interesting, the discussion about moving on from dispositions, as I teach my students about the habits of mind, and in particular things like flexible thinking and using metacognition. I also teach them things like wait time, which picks up on the question which was just mentioned then that came out of the room, whereas in a very simple way, we can get students to think about the difference between an impulsive, immediate answer, what you've been talking about as that sort of fast process, and then to actually reflect on it. So I modeled that in the classroom to get my students to actually take their time, and I actually take them through a process of thinking about what they've moving from what we term a turn and share to a think, pair, share. So showing the difference as you go from mode 1 to mode 2 there. So that's good. So lots of things that that's resonated for me. My question, I guess, is with what you're saying, it's going to take more time, and it was just touched on, I think, by Sarah. She talked about the crowded curriculum. How can we go beyond what I have in my 2 hours of session, which is basically all they have on thinking, the thinking curriculum, in their entire 4-year degree, as far as I know. So that's the only time that they actually look at that. How do we find the time to go into this in more detail? Because whenever we add something in, as we know with our crowded curriculum, you've got to take something out, and we're constantly being told that we have to add more. Not an easy question, I'm sorry, but when we talk about complexity, and again, that's something that resonated for me very much so, that we have to find that time somehow, but it's so difficult to find that extra time.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. I completely agree. Zara, you want to comment on this?
Yes, and sorry for the noise. Yeah, I'm actually going to have to teach a class in 10 minutes, so there are all the students coming in. Yeah, look, Brian, thanks for sharing this. And I don't know how we are going to teach it. You know, like as you're saying, this is a really important issue. But what I do think is that we are in an age where we you know, like, to actually be able to evaluate evidence becomes more and more important through, you know, the increase of data that's available, through, you know, models that, you know, briefly touched on, through the use of AI. So I think it becomes more and more important, and I think the society as such does notice that as well. And so I find it interesting when you say there's the creative and critical thinking, and students don't know necessarily, or pre-service teachers don't know what, you know, how we're actually bringing this in. So there needs to be that, you know, that development on how are we bringing this in, how are we bringing this in the classroom. It's not a short-term view in my point of view, but I think there's a big, like, the really high relevance to it in investing this, and as it's been seen in several research papers at the moment, in, you know, from several countries, science education does take an important role in this. If I'm leaving in 7 minutes, you know where I'm going. I have to go to the class, but I hope that's okay, Tom.
Of course, and I will just add, Brian, I absolutely agree with your points, and I also share your concerns. How we do it and how do we implement it in our teaching and in universities is a big challenge, and I wish I had a simple solution for it, but I think it's just people like us that are trying to push it forward and to be aware of it, and slowly maybe things will start changing, but it's a big challenge in all the education systems everywhere.
We have a question from Hannah in the chat, and her question is, do you think including something like debating courses in schools could help train students when they're still quite young to see, one, what good reasoning is, and two, how every point one argues always comes with a certain perspective and with certain presuppositions? Tom or Sarah?
Sarah, you want to answer?
Yeah, maybe just really briefly. I think in terms of debating, like, I mean, I'm not opposed to this, and you know, there needs to be debate and discussion, and the classroom discussion is incredibly important. I was just coming across this from a point where I feel like we do need to tie it still into this scientific process. That's at least what I feel like. You know, what I find with my pre-service teachers is how would you create opportunities for critical thinking, and often I get this, oh, we're just going to discuss this, and I'm thinking, well, can we take this further? How are we using evidence? You know, how are we engaging with evidence? Can we think of method design, comparing this, or looking at errors, or how that actually then relates? So I don't know if that answers your first question, but I think yes, but I also think we need to take it further. And I should probably say goodbye, Tom. I catch up with you, and because I have to go to the class. But yeah, it was nice meeting you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Zara.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree also. I think debating is one thing that we can use, but it has its flaws. It's not the most perfect method, but it's definitely one method that we can use along with other practices. Personally, my opinion in this is that it lacks the more in-depth. It more teaches you how to respond to others, how to defend your own position, but doesn't really push you to deep thinking. But I think this is a talk by itself to do, so we can discuss it in another opportunity. Efrat, you wanted?
Yeah, we have Efrat and Brian have their hands up. We're running out of time, but if we can.
Is there still time, Joe, or we need to finish?
A quick question would be fine, and then we'll...
just a comment.
Yeah, sure.
I was intrigued by the question that was asked in your room about the move between System 1 and System 2. And I just want to suggest something, because System 1 and System 2 theory resonates very, very closely with the cognitive load theory of Sweller, where he speaks about long-term memory and working memory. And the characteristics of these two systems are very similar to System 1 and System 2. And within the space of the cognitive load theory, a lot of instructional designs were developed specifically and explicitly to trigger the long-term memory, if we look at it as equivalent to System 2. And perhaps some of the answers can come from this theory, because it is a theory of education, unlike System 1 and System 2, which is a psychological theory. Just a comment.
So interested. Thank you so much. Well, I'd like to thank our speakers again today Tom and Sarah for joining us at the Australia-Israel Scholars Seminar Series. And thank you to all our participants. This series is going on every Tuesday and Thursday at 4 p.m. in Australia, 9 a.m. in Israel. And I'll encourage you to tune into our future seminars. You can reach out to Yoni Nazarathi if you have ideas for future seminars, or you can find more seminars coming up there. So thank you so much again. And it's been wonderful to have our colleagues from Israel join us today. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Please.